Welcome to Deep in the Heart, from deep in the heart of Texas, San Antonio. I'm Ann Helmke and the director of the peaceCENTER here, and it's great to have you with us today. It is our hope through Deep in the Heart that whoever is watching this knows that there are people in Texas, in the United States, who are committed to peace and justice and work in terms of nonviolence every day. We will be along the way interviewing people from San Antonio doing some great work, as well as people who travel through. And today we have with us Howard Zehr, who's traveling through. Howard Zehr is widely recognized as a restorative justice pioneer. His insights began with his work in the formation of the first victim offender encounter program in the United States. Howard's book, Changing Lenses, A New Focus for Crime and Justice, is still considered a foundational piece among the restorative justice movement. He's currently professor of sociology and restorative justice at Eastern Mennonite in their graduate program, Conflict Transformation. It's a great honor to have him here with us today. He's traveling through because we're hosting an international conference here on restorative justice that's been put together by the Soul Center here at University Presbyterian. So it's a great honor to have him with us. And Howard, I read your Changing Lenses when it first came out.
Oh, really?
And it changed and transformed me in terms of peace and justice, and also in terms of my ministry as a Lutheran pastor. I'm wondering, it might be helpful for people who are watching if you could give your definition of restorative justice and how that might differ from how many people understand the word justice itself.
I can try.
Okay.
I think I heard the nicest short version of restorative justice I'd ever heard a year or so ago when I was asked to facilitate a circle wedding. You know, one of the processes that's become very popular in restorative justice is circle processes. They came out of Native American communities originally, but they asked for a circle wedding. And so they asked me to facilitate the circle, and we were going around the circle, and one of the people who was one of my former students said to them, "I want you to have a restorative marriage." He says, "That means when we do something wrong, we acknowledge it and try to make it right." And I thought, well, that's really what we're talking about. What restorative justice is saying is that what matters about wrongdoing isn't that you broke some kind of rules or you broke the law or something like that. It's that you did harm. And when you harm somebody, you create needs. And so we have an obligation. That obligation is to try to make it right as much as we can. So restorative justice says we need to name the wrongdoing. We need to address the harms that have resulted from it. We need to take responsibility. And we need to try to make it right as much as we can. Basically, it's about addressing harms, addressing obligations, and involving those people who have a stake in it for some reason. They're impacted by it, involved in it, in the solution in some way. And I think that's really what restorative justice is about.
You're not just a scholar, you're a practitioner of restorative justice. Could you give us some examples of the work, your work in particular, specific ideas?
One of the things I've learned is that many traditional people around the world process things in a circle. When there's a conflict, when there's a problem to be done, they do a circle process. Many of my Well, let me back up a bit. That circle processes first entered the restorative justice in the legal field in the courtroom of Barry Stewart in the Yukon, who was a European doing justice in a First Nation community. And he realized that this outsider sentencing people wasn't working. And he realized that traditionally people had processed in a circle. And so in one of his cases, he got down off the bench and he got everybody, including the prosecutor, sitting in a circle. And he got an elder to help, and they used a talking piece and went around the circle. And they began to do that. Actually, it was recognized in Canadian law through his court, through his decision, and now it's being done all over Canada and lots of places. It involves it involves people sitting in a circle and one person talking at a time. There's a person, like a facilitator or a keeper, and there's something you pass, and only the person who has the talking piece speaks. It's amazing what that simple mechanism can do, partly because of the values. When when we introduce a circle, we talk about the fact that everybody here is here to make has a contribution to make, that they're an honored guest. We acknowledge the values. But that experience of only talking, when you have a talking piece, and instead of popcorn back and forth, taking time to reflect is just amazing. I was involved in the Timothy McVeigh trial. I was appointed by the judge to work with the defense attorneys. About a year after the trial, we got some of the defense attorneys to sit down with some of the victims who had testified. And they went around the circle and they talked about it. And the impact on both the survivors and the attorneys of listening to each other was just amazing. And that's just a simple example of it. So today it's being used, they're using it in inner city, variety of kind of ways to solve problems, to deal with crimes in inner city. They're using it with gangs. Boston, I can tell you some stories about that, where they're getting gang members and community members and government people to sit down together, and some amazing kind of results. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute if we have the time. It's being used in schools a lot. A lot of teachers are now beginning the day with a circle, and they're also using a circle to deal with infractions or harms that are done. And some are actually teaching kids. I mean, I hear stories of kids who've been taught to be circle keepers, and a fight or something breaks out on the playground, and so the kids go get a stick to use a talking piece, and they get everybody to sit in a circle, and they talk about it in a circle.
What do you think some of the most successful programs are in terms of restorative justice? Could you give us some specific examples of this that you can think of?
The research is on the Encounter program is very positive. The latest study was one out of England where they looked at pro studies from around the world. They tended to be programs where police were doing the facilitation, which is not a model that I'm terribly excited about. But they concluded that there were huge benefits to victims, that it reduced victims' trauma, the satisfaction rates. Victims and offenders were very high. The reduction in most cases of offending was seen. They found, and it's all things we predicted all along. It's been consistent. We've always found that high satisfaction rates, reduced trauma for victims, better understanding of each other, better understanding by offenders of what they've done, and so forth. Mm-hmm. One of the most interesting cases is the country of New Zealand, which has revamped, and I think it's the only country that's ever done this, has revamped their whole juvenile legal system to be restorative at the core and to use the court as a backup to it. So in New Zealand, for serious crime, you're supposed to go to a family group conference, which is a restorative conference, and only go to court if you plead not guilty or if you can't solve it in that circle.
But they only do that in the juvenile system?
They do that. It began the juvenile system. It is the system meant for the juvenile system. They have done a number of pilot projects in adults. There's a number of voluntary or referral kinds of processes for adults, but that isn't the whole system for adults.
It's interesting that it started with the juvenile system. We see how that grows and develops.
Well, and it's interesting how it started. They really didn't know anything about restorative justice as such when they started. Later they learned about restorative justice and used it to tweak it. It came out of two concerns. It came out of a huge incarceration rate for young people and a huge overuse of foster care for young people. And it came out of a criticism of the indigenous Maori people, and this is really telling. They said this Western legal system is foreign to us, it's contrary to our values, and furthermore, it's institutional racism. And so after a kind of listening process...
that came from the Maoris?
That came from the Maori people, and they made such a convincing argument that the government went back and rethought what they were trying to do and created a process that, while not Maori, allows for Maori values to take place and also for Pakeha, European, to work in this process. So it's a conference, but unlike our victim-offender dialogue process, which primarily victim, offender, and a facilitator, they have the offender, all the family members and extended family members that they can round up, victim and supporter, a police officer, because in New Zealand the police are the prosecutors, so they bring the charges, and an attorney for that young person. And they are charged with sorting out the whole offense, not just whether there ought to be restitution. The whole offense. Is this young person going to jail? Does he or she need treatment? And so forth. And they're supposed to do it by consensus. So everybody in the room has to agree to the process, which is phenomenal when you think about it.